Oz Katerji is a journalist who's currently reporting from Kiev. Oz, you're very welcome to the show and thank you so much for joining us. What is the latest in the city?
There were some quite loud explosions today, a few air raid sirens. Haven't heard anything on any casualties in the center of the city, but we were out at a children's hospital earlier today, and we saw there are about a dozen children who are receiving dialysis treatment. They're now living in the basement of this hospital, along with their mothers and family members who are there with them. Even people who aren't being directly impacted by the violence are being indirectly impacted in other ways. The children's hospital director told me that they were used to dealing with several burst appendixes a day, and now they're dealing with only just one. And he said that he fears that means that children are dying at home, unable to get to treatment.
My God, yeah. They're the things I suppose you lose sight of, that people still get ill. Babies are still being born, I assume. That type of thing continues happening regardless of war.
Yeah, I mean, babies are being born in bunkers now at the moment, and that's I think that's a rather damning indictment of what's happening here. That children are being born in bunkers while air raid sirens and bombs are going off around them.
What type of supplies are getting into the city to help these children on dialysis, or their new mums and babies, or indeed anyone else?
So the hospital told me they still had supplies for up to a month. Food was getting quite short here. I need to point out that I'm only in the center of Kyiv, right? So, like being in the center of any major capital city, life like that is really more spread out into the suburbs. So
Yeah.
really, I'm concentrated in the city, and there's fighting in the suburbs. So I haven't seen much in the way of fighting with my own eyes. I haven't seen much in the way of heavy casualties or heavy bombardment. That is happening on the outside of the city. There were food shortages in the middle of the city, but that's because the shops weren't open and there weren't lorry drivers and there weren't people restacking shelves. But in the last couple of days, there's definitely been a restock of some of these shop shelves, and there are less people in the city. More and more people every single day find ways to get out of here. So that means the demand is decreasing, which means there's more food, there's less food queues. I have noticed some really long lines forming outside pharmacies now. So, getting just basic supplies, very few shops are open. You can't go to specialist shops if you want to buy shoes or clothes, or, there's no equivalent of Primark that's open. The only things that are open are food shops and pharmacies. That's it. There's no restaurants open. I found one baker that was open and two coffee stands, but even they're not open all day.
And I appreciate, as you say, you're only in one part of the city, and it's a huge city, Kyiv, and you can't have your eyes on all of it. But what level of damage has been done in and around the city from Russian bombardment? We've seen some footage today, for example, from other parts of Ukraine, admittedly not from Kyiv. I mean, it echoes the worst of Grozny.
Yeah, I mean, Grozny is really what the fear is they'll do here, or Aleppo, or any of the cities in Syria that were slaughtered by Russian aircraft. But there are some other towns that on the outskirts of Kiev, like Borodyanka, Irpin, Bucha, that have been very heavily targeted by Russian artillery fire. Many people trapped inside rubble, residential buildings destroyed. What's happening here is a very, very serious war crime, and the crimes against humanity being committed against Ukrainian civilians by the Russian government.
How close are the Russians to Kiev? Of course, we've all been following, and you and I have spoken about this convoy that's been parked up for days on end, it seems, outside the city. Has there been any progress in that regard?
So the latest that I heard on this convoy, and this is not information that I can necessarily confirm, is that it has been under attack from Ukrainian forces, and they've managed to slow down. It's not just a case of them having difficulties with supply, which we know the Russians are having difficulties supplying their own troops, but that Ukrainian forces have had some successes targeting this convoy. So, this long convoy hasn't made its way towards the outskirts of the city yet.
I know that they're all saying the first casualty in war is truth, so it's very hard to get exact figures on this, but we see President Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, talking about over 9,000 Russian casualties thus far. Have you any other detail on the level of damage being done to the Russians?
So the Russian government admitted that nearly 500 Russian troops had died a couple of days ago. Right now, for context, the entirety of US troops killed over 20 years in Iraq was 4,000 something, right? 4,700 plus. So just the figures that the Kremlin have admitted have been 10% of the total 20-year Iraq toll on the US in like 7 days, right? And that's just the numbers the Kremlin are admitting. So maybe the Ukrainian figures aren't quite correct and the Kremlin figures definitely aren't correct, but let's say it's somewhere in the middle of those two, somewhere in between the 9,000 and the 500. It's been a very heavy death toll for the Russian army so far. And I think it's only just going to get heavier. If they want to try and take the city, they're going to have to go street to street. And there's no sign that they have the competence, confidence, ability to do that. What we fear is that they will try and besiege the city and bombard it and try and force the population to submit by committing atrocities against them, which is their model, and they perfected it in Syria.
I mean, when images like the ones I mentioned of these kind of apartment buildings, bombed out apartment buildings, like Grozny or Aleppo or anybody else, are doing the rounds online, and then the news emerges of firefights at a nuclear power station, including damage to that power station. Now it seems to have been brought under control, but the Russians taking control of that area. In the midst of that, the news of those casualties and the slowing of that convoy, is that what gives people confidence?
The conversations that I've had with people in recent days about the war, not one of them has told me that they think they're going to lose, but every single one of them have told me that they have no choice, almost like defeat is unthinkable. And because it's unthinkable, they can't think about it. They're only thinking about victory. I can't really expand on that because it's not my war. I'm not on the front lines fighting. I've been on the front lines covering the war, but I have no way to accurately tell how the war is doing on a macro basis. I can tell you that the Russians predicted that everything would fall before them, and that hasn't happened. The Ukrainians have fought incredibly, have resisted incredibly against one of the most powerful armies in the world. They said this city would fall in 48 hours, and 8 days later, we're still standing. So it's difficult to give you predictions. But as I said, for most people in Ukraine, for most people that I've spoken to here in Kyiv, defeat is unthinkable. It is unthinkable for them.